Should you take notes on stage while giving a speech or presentation? Let's break this video up into 4 parts. First, let's answer whether we should use notes or not. Second, how do you speak without using notes? Third, if you do take notes on stage, how do you do that correctly? And lastly, should you memorize your speech or not? The simple answer is yes, you can. There are very few cases where if we have some competition or a specific reason to not take notes on stage. But usually we need to remember this. The audience cares much more about the information and how we're delivering it to them as opposed to whether we've memorized the content or not. If we feel we'll be a lot more comfortable and relaxed if we have our notes with us, we should take them on. However, for whatever reason, if you don't want to take notes on stage, here are a few ways that you can go on stage without blanking out and without memorizing your speech. Very first thing, don't write your speech like this, in this essay format where there are no gaps in between. Instead, write it like this. Give it more space, more paragraphs. It automatically becomes easier for us to remember things. The second thing we want to do is add images next to these paragraphs that represent something that's happening in our speech. One thing is certain, that most of us tend to remember best with visuals. And when we complement our paragraphs with visuals and then familiarize ourselves with the order of those images, we'll be a lot more likely to remember all our content without taking notes. The third thing to keep in mind is that we, as humans, tend to not remember information and data points very well. That requires memorization to an extent. But a good solution to that is to supplement your speeches and presentations with anecdotes, stories, and personal experiences. Any narrative is much easier for us to remember. And in most cases, as long as we remember the beginning of those stories, the rest of it should come pretty naturally. So unless you're giving an extremely technical or information-driven presentation, which are now tending to reduce over the years, try to supplement your speech with a bit of storytelling. Remember, information is boring, but narration is engaging. Getting to the narration, if you have a hard time remembering the words within your speech, your brain usually needs just a clue to do that. And to provide the clues, you can break up your speech into a structure. There are many structures in communications that we can use, but the one we're going to talk about today is the storytelling structure. And it's broken up into 6 parts: vision, conflict, solution, validation, way forward, and CTA. This basically means we start off our presentation by stating its purpose. What are we here to achieve? Then we move on to the problems which are stopping us from achieving that goal. The more we can emphasize on the challenge, the sweeter the solution looks. And then we present our solution to the problem and we supplement that with validation points to back our solution. This is where we can go heavy into data points, testimonials, success stories, team understandings, so on and so forth. We can then move to the way forward. What is the plan ahead after this presentation is completed? And finally, the CTA, which stands for Call to Action. What do we want our listeners to do to put this plan into motion? It can be as simple as asking them for some information or making them actually act on something. Keeping these points in mind, you'll increase your chances of not blanking out while delivering a clear speech. But what if you do want to take notes on stage? How do you speak correctly using notes? Try to avoid taking books like these and definitely avoid loose papers. They can fly out and they just look messy and unorganized. That reflects on the credibility we have as presenters. Instead, you want to rely on cue cards. And when you break your speech up into different structures, simply write the beginning or the key points from each paragraph onto your cue cards. One tip to keep in mind is that while you're presenting, even if you're not looking down at your cue cards, as you keep progressing from paragraph to paragraph, keep moving the cue cards along. So if you do blank out on something, you can look down and you're at the right card instead of juggling around when you do reach that fateful moment. And last thing, should you memorize your speech or not? In most cases, you shouldn't, unless you're giving something very important like a TED Talk. In that case, memorize. But if you're memorizing, make sure you memorize it 100%. Memorize and practice it at least 30 to 40 times. Because if you do blank out while speaking and you don't have notes, it's going to completely dampen your speech. And whether you're speaking with or without notes, it's very important that from the very beginning, we need to grip our audience's attention. If you want to know what your first opening line should be, check out this video right here. We've highlighted some great examples that you can start utilizing immediately.